We're so very pretty, oh so
All right, hello there, thrill seekers. That was a little snip of my psychedelic version of Pretty Vacant. It was an idea I had about 10 or more years ago to do an album of psychedelic versions of punk rock songs, but I only ever got, I was going to say finished. I didn't even finish that one. I just finished it a couple of days ago, but that was the only one I really got anywhere with. Anyway, there you go. Hope you enjoyed it. So, in my rant the other day, I was talking about Dharma names, and this got me thinking that I'd never done a video about Dharma names. I looked through my videos, and I couldn't find one. I thought I'd done one, but I haven't. So let's do that. So just to remind you where this all began, is in the introduction of this book, How the Swans Came to the Lake, and I lambasted that introduction. The book itself, well, I don't think they've changed the text of the book, and I remember the book itself being pretty good, but the introduction is terrible. And one of the many terrible things it says in this introduction is, he writes, I guess he's talking about Rick Fields, the guy who wrote the book. He writes, for example, of the ways that a convert to Buddhism might adopt a Tibetan or Japanese name or style of dress in certain contexts, while always having the option of switching back when it is convenient, what we now call cultural appropriation. So, now, this guy who wrote that is Benjamin Bogan, a scholar of Himalayan Buddhism, an associate professor and director of Asian studies at Skidmore College. Unless he is the worst scholar of, a professor and director of Asian studies in the world, he knows that what he said in that sentence is wrong. What we are getting when you get a Dharma name is not that you are adopting a Japanese name, or even, to go further, a Japanese style of dress. So, and it didn't occur to me until I read that and started sort of thinking about it that anyone would imagine that the Dharma names that they are given, let's just take the Japanese Zen tradition because that's the one I know best, but I think this probably goes for the Tibetan tradition as well. I wouldn't have thought before this that anyone would have thought that the Dharma names they received are Japanese names. Like, those are not Japanese names. Those are not names like Takeshi or Kazuo or Masahiro or Junko or Rikako or anything like that. Those are Japanese names. Those are names that Japanese people give their kids. The names that you get when you do a refuge taking, a precept taking ceremony are not Japanese names. They are just as unusual sounding to Japanese people as they are to Americans or French people or Canadians or whatever. I would say, yeah, having lived in Japan 11 years, I would say that those names sound just as weird if you're Japanese as if you are not Japanese. So they're not Japanese names. And just for that matter, the style of dress that he's talking about, Japanese people don't walk around in black robes with an orange okesa on them, or orange or brown or whatever, or black okesa on them, just down the street. The only people that do that are monks, and even the monks don't do that all the time. They do that when they are doing their monk thing. A lot of times monks will just dress in ordinary clothes and you'd never know that they were monks. So this idea that they're wearing Japanese clothes too, that's stupid. That's just stupid. So let's talk about Dharma names. The best source I have of information about Dharma names comes from this book that I was given by Greg Fain at the San Francisco Zen Center, and it is copyright 2001 San Francisco Zen Center, Soto Zen Buddhist Association. I don't know if you can buy this, so I'm sorry to show you something you can't buy. Maybe it's up on Terabes. I haven't checked. Terabes is this website from Hungary or somewhere like that puts up a lot of PDFs of various Buddhist books that are otherwise pretty hard to find. Maybe I should send a PDF or send scans of this book to Terabest so they can put it up if they don't have it. But it's a really good book of information on what Dharma names are and how to use them. But one thing that isn't included in this book is where Dharma names come from, where the tradition started. And I was actually able to find that information on a website called Dharma Drum, which I had never heard of until I found this article. But Dharma Drum kindly put up an article that explains where Dharma names came from. So I'm going to read you what they say about it. There is no record about when Dharma names were first used. Shakyamuni Buddha's birth name was Siddhartha Gautama, which was still used by many to address the Buddha after he first became a renunciant and later attained Buddhahood, because there wasn't any Buddhist name or Dharma name given to him after his attainment of full enlightenment. In fact, Shakyamuni Buddha as an epithet wasn't a Dharma name. Shakya was the Buddha's clan name, and the people of the clan were referred to as the Shakyas. On the other hand, Muni was an adjective used to praise the Buddha, and you sometimes see this word Muni, or I have, used by Indian people. It means kind of sort of wise person. It was used to praise Buddha as someone who had eliminated all his afflictions. And so that's not a Dharma name. And then skipping ahead, it says, the earliest Dharma name that appeared in China was found in the Eastern Jin dynasty. And unfortunately, they don't tell us when the Jin dynasty was. I guess we have to go look that up. It was Master Dao An who first advocated that all Buddhist monks should use the Chinese character Shi, which sounds similar to the first syllable of Shakya, as their monastic surname. There was no precedent for this usage. For example, after Kumarajiva, who's one of the famous translators of Buddhist works into Chinese, but he's Indian, after he became a monastic, he was still addressed as Kumarajiva instead of Shi Kumarajiva. And so on and so forth. And it says, in the past, only monastic members used the Dharma name. Today, however, lay practitioners who have taken the 3 refuges are also given a Dharma name. And so that's where it began. And then there's this whole bunch of little specifics about Dharma names, so I'm going to give them to you, and there's not going to be a quiz on this, but I just think this might be sort of interesting. And this is written by Shohaku Okumura Roshi, who is, I believe he's now in Indiana. He's a Japanese Zen Buddhist priest who does his thing, and he's written a lot of really good books, so I always recommend Shohaku Okumura's books about Buddhism. And he says, the general terms for Buddhist names in Japan are Hommyo, which means Dharma name, Kaimyo, which means precept name, and Seigo, which means sacred name. These terms are used interchangeably. That's an interesting, and he doesn't elaborate on that, so I'm not sure what he means by that, but let's keep going. 2 ideographs, 2 Chinese characters, make up a name. That's generally the case in Japan for just anybody's name. There are some 1 Chinese character names, and there's some 3 Chinese character names that I've come across, but in general, a name is 2 Chinese characters, a first name or a last name. But like I say, there are exceptions in both cases. People are given 1 name or sometimes 2 names. When 1 name is given, it is a Hogo, Dharma name. When 2 names are given, the first is a Dogo, Way name, and the second is a Hogo, Dharma name. The Dogo can be considered as a formal name, and the Hogo as an intimate, informal name. And traditionally, a Hogo is given when a person receives the precepts and is ordained, and a Dogo is given when the teacher acknowledges that the person has matured in practice. So the Hogo is the general thing, and the other is more specific to somebody who's, the teacher might be either making that person their Dharma heir or thinking along those lines, or making the person a priest or something. That would be the traditional practice. But then Shohaku Okumura continues, nowadays both names are often given when a person is ordained. Names and precepts can also be given to practitioners who die before being ordained. basic guidelines, he says, a teacher chooses a name or a pair of names to reflect excellent qualities of the person, as well as expressing good wishes or a positive prediction for the person. A Buddhist name is a Dharma gift from the teacher to the student and is given at the ordination ceremony, usually without revealing it to the student in advance. The name should have pleasing sounds and beneficial meanings. There are two types of ideographs, those which represent concrete objects and those which represent abstract concepts. It is preferable that the dogo, way name, contain an ideograph from each type. And there's also another tradition which Okumura Roshi doesn't mention, but I think it's a fairly strong tradition, it's not done everywhere, that the Dharma name should sound a little bit like your given name. So now that's not always the case, and sometimes that's ignored. But I will show you, and I know I've shown this on this page before. This is my Dharma name. Wait a minute, I gotta show you where it is. Right there. Right there. That's my imitation of Truman Capote or E.T. Anyway, that's my Dharma name, which is Odo Ben A. And this is, Odo is, I think it is supposed to sound a little bit like Warner. There are not many Japanese Chinese characters that you might use that would sound like Warner. And in the Nishijima Roshi tradition, the Do is usually the second character in all of the Wei names. Ben A sounds a little bit like Bradley, not much, but I think that's one of the reasons it was chosen. And Ben means to study, and A means hero. And the A part of my name is also the first character in the Japanese word for English, eigo. So I don't know if that had something to do with it, but it's got a positive meaning and a nice sound. And Nishijima Roshi put his Dharma name on here, which sorry, I'm looking at everything backwards when I see it on the screen, so it's a little difficult. So that is Gudo Wafu. So Gudo means the way of stupidity, and that is the name given to him by his Buddhist teacher. And Wafu is that's Wa is peace. What is the Fu? I'd have to look that up. But let's. I want to make a different point. I'll look that up later. But Wafu is actually a Chinese pronunciation of Nishijima Roshi's given name, which is Kazuo. So these characters would normally be pronounced Kazuo. Ziggy, what are you barking at? So Kazuo is a very common Japanese first name, but one of the things that people often do for their Dharma names is they give their given first name in a Chinese pronunciation. This is also revealed by Okumura Roshi, who wrote this and mentions that his Dharma name, Shohaku, is actually a Chinese pronunciation, or sort of a Japanese version of a Chinese pronunciation, because it isn't exactly the way a Chinese person would pronounce it. But anyway, and there's a whole, you'd have to go and look up, you have to go study Japanese if you want to understand all this, and I don't want to get into all that mess. But anyway, his given first name, Okumura's given first name, was Masahiro. And then he just changed the pronunciation of Masahiro to Shohaku, and that became his Dharma name. Sho is translated as true, right, or correct, and Haku is broad or wide, as in wide knowledge. So that would be the meaning that his first name Masahiro had already. But when you change the pronunciation of it, that sort of tends to emphasize the Buddhist nature of the name, so you think of it more in terms of the meaning rather than just the ordinary first name. Now, lots of people use their Dharma names in different ways. Some people get very excited to get a Dharma name, and then they never want to be called anything else. And I've met a few people like that who just want to go by their Dharma names. And some people I've known for years only by their Dharma names, and then later learn their actual first name. Some people like to translate their Dharma names. I met a guy at Tassajara who referred to himself at the time as Luminous Owl, which was the English translation of his Dharma name, which is a interesting Dharma name. And then now he goes by the Japanese pronunciation, or the Japanese/Chinese pronunciation of the name, which I've forgotten what it is. So anyway, in the case of Nishijima Roshi, he called himself Gudo Nishijima. So the Gudo is his Dharma name, and Nishijima is his family name. And his student Mike Cross signed himself here as Chodo Cross. And they're different ways some people use them. Mike Cross, when I knew him, mostly seemed to go by Mike. He didn't. People weren't calling him Chodo. Most people in Nishijima Roshi's lineage preferred to use their given names. I can only think of one person who insisted on using his Dharma name, and he was a little bit weird. So, but yeah, that tends to be the case in that lineage. Other lineages do it differently. It's one thing I've noticed among people in the Sambo Kyodan lineage is to sort of use their Dharma name as a kind of a middle name. John Daido Lori being one prominent example. So it's like calling yourself Lee Harvey Oswald, like you're a serial killer. Here's another example of that, Matthew Jakusan Sullivan. Now I don't know if Matthew. Okay, it says on the back here, Matthew Jakusan Sullivan was ordained at the Nine Mountains Zen Gate Society. I don't know if that's Sambo Kyodan lineage. Maybe somebody can tell me, but that whenever I see that used as a middle name, I tend to think it must be somebody from the Sambo Kyodan, which is what is I don't know what Sambo Kyodan is in English, but it's the lineage that was most popularized by John Daido Lori in America. And it's a very minor lineage in Japan, but it tends to be kind of a fairly much bigger among the Zen stuff in America than it is in Japan. In my own case, I don't go around calling myself Odo Bene. I never did, never have. It just seems weird and pretentious to me, but that doesn't mean it's weird and pretentious when anybody else does it. It's just, for me, I just feel weird. I would feel weird introducing myself as Odo. But as I say, it is not a Japanese name, and it sounds weird to people even in Japan, and I would think that Japanese people would probably consider that to be, well, they would first consider, they would know instantly if you came to them with a name like Chodo or Gudo or Odo. Do actually, there's a kind of another tradition that doesn't always follow everywhere, but it's a tradition of the teacher gives you a name that's similar to the teacher's Dharma name. So Gudo gave everybody, as far as I know, in his whoever he gave a Dharma name to had a Dharma name that ended in Do, which means way. So that's kind of common, and that probably comes from Kodo Sawaki, who was not Nishijima Roshi's ordaining teacher, but probably the teacher he most admired. So there might have been some back and forth between him and the teacher. Was Rempo Niwa was the person who ordained him. And as you can see, well, Rempo, the Po might be Ho, which is, well, that's probably Dharma. Anyway, so that is not a Do name. So he might have, Nishijima Roshi might have requested to have a name that ends with Do. I don't know. I never asked him. But that is something that one can do. If one is getting a Dharma name, you can request what you want your Dharma name to be. I have given a few Dharma names, a handful of Dharma names, and in most cases, what I've done, well, I was going to say that I did give somebody a Dharma name that he requested. I think I've done that more than once, and that's a common practice. And whenever I've given Dharma names, okay, I've been conflicted about the same thing that I know at least one commenter talked about, is why don't we just use American Dharma names, and I joked about how Roger McGuinn, his name that he was given by his Sobud teacher was Roger, so that's not exotic sounding at all to most Americans, or probably most people in the West. But I have tried to give people a name that's as close as possible to their given name whenever I've given a Dharma name, but I have spelled it out in Chinese characters, and therefore it would have a slightly different pronunciation than their given name. Okumura Roshi actually addresses this in his essay, and he says this: in Japan, the custom regarding Buddhist names has been changing, so it is natural for it to change in this country too, in America. I have heard that a few Zen centers have started to use English Dharma names. I think that is all right, but still many practitioners and teachers want to have Dharma names in the Japanese style, which of course is the Chinese style derived from China. And because there are principles to follow when combining Chinese characters, it is difficult for many American teachers to create Dharma names. And then what this book mostly is a list of sort of suggestions for characters to use in people's Dharma names. And I've often referred to this book myself when giving people Dharma names. And I feel like giving them in Chinese characters, I feel like if I really did, give people Dharma names like Turd Ferguson or something, or, something, Dennis, or, Karen or something, I think people would be really disappointed to get Dharma names like that. So I think that's one of the reasons you want it to be kind of special in a way, and it doesn't necessarily have to be foreign, and it has nothing whatsoever to do with cultural appropriation, because as I said, when Japanese people and Chinese people too, I'm sure, and probably Korean people as well, and other people, when they are given their Dharma names, those Dharma names sound exotic, even in their country. And I also am aware that this tradition of something like a Dharma name extends beyond even Buddhism, because when I first encountered the Hare Krishnas, they also had Dharma names. And I remember Tapapunja was one of the guys I met, and he said that his given name had been Terry, and Tapapunja has some kind of meaning in Sanskrit, and that's why he was, but he was given the name beginning with T so that it would kind of match with Terry. So that's a kind of a tradition there. These days in Japan, people often go by their given last name plus their Dharma name, hence Gudo Nishijima. So that's his Dharma name plus his given name. Shohaku Okumura is another example of that. That's kind of common. We tended to call Nishijima Roshi, we would call him Nishijima Sensei, or just Sensei. That was the common form of address just among the people who were with him. And Sensei just means teacher. And it doesn't, there's a tendency, especially in the Sambo Kyodan lineage, to use sensei and roshi as terms of rank. So like a roshi outranks a sensei. Maybe outweighs him too, I don't know. But that's not the case in most of Japan. Sensei just means teacher, and I've even heard hairdressers addressed as sensei. And I was given, sensei was kind of a nickname I picked up at Tsuburaya Productions when I worked there in Japan, because I had been an English teacher before I joined Tsuburaya Productions, so people sometimes call me sensei as a kind of a joke. So it doesn't really have any big meaning in Japan to use those words. And as for the exoticness of Dharma names, I mean, we have this tradition as well. Ziggy just got startled when I picked up that thing. A lot of our names that we think of as ordinary names in English are biblical names. Like I just made a list: Benjamin, Daniel, David, Deborah, Rebecca, Elizabeth, Michael, Paul, Peter. I think Philip is another one. And when those names were originally given to people, it would indicate that they are a Christian, and probably sounded a bit foreign to the rest of the folks before those names became common. So that's another aspect of this, just to kind of, again, punch left on the guy who called it cultural appropriation, because I'm just so PO'd that somebody would try to make a case that Dharma names are a form of cultural appropriation. And as for continuing to use them, I personally am a little on the fence about the whole thing, and always have been. I think I indicated that earlier in this video. I don't use my Dharma name very often. I sometimes feel that people who do use their Dharma names are being a little pretentious, a little bit like putting it out there a little too much, at least for my tastes. I don't like announcing my religion as the first thing I do when I introduce myself to someone, which you're doing if you come to somebody and say, "Hi, my name is Luminous Owl," or "My name is Chodo or Gudo," or something like that. So, and in different contexts, it's different. Like I said about you using sort of common American or British or German or whatever names for Dharma names, I don't know. I just think people would be disappointed. But it is kind of an initiation thing. It is sort of, it's something that you do to make that person feel sort of included within the movement or the group. And, personally, I've always been uncomfortable with being included in movements or groups, but I know that a lot of people really like that and really find that valuable and really find that to be an aid to their practice. It makes them better able to practice if they feel like they're part of something. So, I think it's a fine tradition to keep, and I don't think there's any good reason to drop the Japanese names or the Tibetan names or the Thai names or whatever people are getting, or names in Sanskrit like the Hare Krishnas do, just because it makes some people, just because some people are going to complain about cultural appropriation. I think if people complain that something is cultural appropriation, you should probably do more of it. But that's just my personal opinion about that. Anyway, that's so I think it's a fine tradition to do if you like that sort of thing, and I don't think it's something we should drop. I just think it's cool, if you want it, and if you get a Dharma name and you don't want to use it very often, like I didn't, then you don't. But I consider it to be kind of an honor, and it makes me feel kind of warm and fuzzy inside that Nishijima Roshi gave me that name Odo Bene, because it means the way of answers and hero of study, and it expresses something that he must have felt about me at the time that he gave me that name. So that's nice, and I feel that's nice, and I think that's what a lot of people feel about their Dharma names. It makes them feel like a connection to their teacher, and it gives them the kind of warm, fuzzy, belonging feeling, and what's wrong with that? I don't think there's anything wrong with that. All right, I have gone on way too long about Dharma names, so if you want to contribute to me doing more research on Dharma names and other things, you can go to the URL that you're seeing on the screen below, which is hardcorezen.info/donate. That is hardcorezen.info/donate, or if you don't like going to that URL, if you're watching this on YouTube, the same links are in the description below as you would find if you went to that URL. So you can send me a contribution that way. I really appreciate it, because that's how I make my living. That's how I feed Ziggy. That's how I do all the things that I do in life. And I appreciate your support, but you don't got to support me if you don't want to. All right, we will see you next time. Have a good time all the time. Bye. What do you think of Dharma names? Ziggy is a kind of Dharma name, because when we first got you, the shelter called you Georgie, and then we just wanted to give you your own name to belong to our little clan, our little pack. So that's why you're Ziggy now. So Ziggy's your Dharma name. All right, you want to go inside and edit the video? We can do that. All right, bye Ziggy.